To another episode of the For the Property Investor podcast, and we're here with the weekly news segment, of course, with the only man that can bring us the news, Nick Bendel.
Well,
Welcome,
thank
Nick.
you. Thank you for having me. I love joining you each week for the podcast.
Yes, and there's lots of things always happening in the news, especially when it relates to property and finance and what's happening in real estate and the general economy. So, but before we get into that, what's been happening in your week for the past week?
Well, I had a wonderful week since we last saw each other. I run a business called Hunter and Scribe, which is a copywriting agency that writes content for finance and property professionals throughout Australia. And during the week, I conducted a presentation for a group of financial advisors explaining how to create a LinkedIn profile that will help you attract and convert clients, and got some really, really good questions from the advisors in the audience, which I appreciated.
Great, yes, because if there's anyone who I would recommend as a good person to be able to um, scale up their LinkedIn profile, it would certainly be you. It's you're very prolific. Is
Prolific.
that the yeah, prolific? That's the right word. See, I didn't go to school, did I? Um, and to learn those words, I was good at the numbers, but never good at the words. And it's you're very that word on LinkedIn. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I do aim to be that word. I publish daily content on LinkedIn. My company, we write LinkedIn posts for dozens of finance professionals around Australia. So it is something that I'm passionate about and knowledgeable about, which I think is probably why they invited me to give the presentation.
Very good, very good. Well, it's yes, I always said that English was my second language, and after maths and economics.
I thought you were going to say your first language was the language of love.
Oh, well, you'd have to ask my wife that.
Okay, well, that is a separate podcast. And what have you been up to over the past week?
The past week, it's been a good week with changing lots of processes in our business at the
Hmm.
moment. So in the way that we communicate with our clients, and we're changing software in a week. So with our trust accounting processes, so all of very exciting things. And all these things happen with growing pains. So yeah, it's with a growing business. So looking forward to all of that. Well, I'm actually looking forward to in about 6 weeks' time when we don't have to change anything anymore.
And this growing business of yours, you're talking about Leafield, which is a property management group in 5 states.
Yes, thank you for reminding me. Yes, Leafield Real Estate, we're a specialist property management business across 5 states, over 300 suburbs, Australia-wide. And yes, we work closely with a lot of buyers agents, sales agents, even some mortgage brokers to be able to help them look after their clients who are property investors.
Well, I love it. You and Leafield do an incredible job. There are very, very few property management businesses in multiple states.
Yeah, there's a select few of us, but yes, it's but it is growing. It's I see it as the future of the industry, and but it needs to be done right. And there's been a few people who have tried to do it and failed, but we're trying to do it and succeed. And the best way we can succeed is by focusing on trying to provide a good service to the client.
And
So
the thing I love about you having this national group is you've got your finger on the pulse in multiple states across the country, which is why you always provide such insightful commentary. With that in mind, shall we move on to the first news story?
yes, Nick, yeah, good segue there. What's in the news this week, Nick, that you're bringing us?
Our first story today, RBA sends mixed messages on inflation. When the Reserve Bank made its recent decision to reduce the cash rate from 4.35% to 4.1%, it noted in its statement that, quote, inflationary pressures are easing a little more quickly than expected. However, on the same day the RBA reduced the cash rate, it published its latest statement on monetary policy, which forecasted inflation would increase. Inflation was 2.4% in the December quarter, placing it within the RBA's target range of 2 to 3%. The RBA has forecasted inflation will remain at 2.4% in June, but will rise to 3.7% by the end of this year. Inflation is then forecast to fall to 3.2% by June 2026 and 2.8% by December 2026. So, Owen, the RBA has said that inflationary pressures are easing a little more quickly than expected and that inflation will soon start rising again. How are we to make sense of this?
Yeah, it's a bit confusing, isn't it, Nick?
Hmm.
It's like, lucky I had an itchy spot there. Um, it's kind of a bit confusing. It's if we're expecting inflation to go up by the end of the year, do we not need to keep interest rates a little bit higher to be able to make sure it doesn't? But if inflation is falling as it has been and it's well within the range, then does that give them the ability to drop rates now? And if inflation does increase down the track, even though they're forecasting it, then it gives them the opportunity to put them back up later in the year. So, yeah, are we going to have a bit of a roller coaster of inflation and interest rates for the next 12 months?
That would be interesting because people have been speculating for more than a year about when the RBA was going to start cutting rates, and people were crying out for it. It's finally happened, which I think has given a boost to confidence. But if rates were to then go up later this year, what sort of effect would that have on consumer confidence?
Yes, it would certainly be a bit all over the place.
Mm. Well, I'm very curious to see how it plays out. And a few days after the rate cut, the RBA Governor, Michelle Bullock, she appeared before the House of Representatives Standing Committee on Economics, and she noted that when the RBA made the last cash rate increase in November 2023 from 4.1 to 4.35%, the reason the RBA decided to make that one more hike, even though a lot of people argued at the time that it was unnecessary, was because it wanted to take out, quote, insurance against the risk of inflation rising again. Now, Michelle Bullock says the reason the RBA has reduced the cash rate is because, quote, this insurance is no longer required. Is she right, Owen?
Mm. Interesting choice of language there because it was like the rate rise that we needed as a little bit extra. So it wasn't a real rate rise; it was just insurance. It was a rate rise in place of insurance, and now the insurance is no longer required. So it's almost like it's a rate rise with a asterisk, and so we're taking away the rate rise with an asterisk, and so that does that mean the next rate cut will be a real rate cut, or will that
Mm.
yeah, so it's I think she's using her language carefully to make sure that or to give the impression that this was a one-off and don't necessarily um, expect another one.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that's the message she was trying to deliver. It can be, we can never know for sure. All we're doing is speculating on the odd word here and there. But yes, I wouldn't be surprised if that's what she was trying to tell us.
Hmm.
Now, we're recording this podcast 6 days after the rate cut. As we discussed earlier, your business Leafield operates in 5 states. Have you noticed any change in on the ground activity in any of those 5 states since the rate cut?
Well, certainly not from a leasing point of view. It's but talking to our agents on the ground, um, who are like the sales agents and buyers agents. There's probably since there was a probably since there was talk of a definite rate rise, like a 90% chance of a rate cut going to happen. There was a lot more activity in the buyer space has picked up. So buyers are definitely out there with a more positive sentiment in the market, looking at what they can buy and thinking, well, even if this is just one rate cut, then it might mean there's more to come, or at least the next one will be down again. So let's get out there before prices start to rise. And so certainly wouldn't say prices are rising. It just means that uh, we're not going backwards, and the sentiment is going to be um, the next step going up.
Well, every one of the 7 remaining RBA meetings this year, people are going to be watching them very closely. But I think particularly the next one in early April, that's going to be during an election campaign. It's going to be very, very interesting to see what the RBA does with that one.
Yes, it will be. And it'll be interesting to see if the election campaign has already been called by that stage officially.
Well, let's move on to our second story. Government takes aim at foreign buyers. The federal government is banning foreign citizens from buying existing homes for 2 years in a move aimed at boosting supply and improving housing affordability. From the 1st of April this year to March 31, 2027, foreign buyers won't be able to purchase established dwellings. However, they will still be able to buy new homes. Housing Minister Claire O'Neil said the move would, quote, free up thousands of properties for Australians. However, with foreign investors accounting for only a small slice of the market, the impact is expected to be limited. The most recent ATO data shows foreign buyers made just 5,360 residential property purchases in the 2023 financial year, with only a third of those involving existing homes. That's a drop in the ocean compared to the 670,000 property transactions that happen in an average year. Owen, what do you think of the government's decision to stop foreigners buying existing homes?
Yes, well, I just did that quick calculation there of a third of 5,360, and what do we come out at? 1,786 houses. Now, that's better than nothing, but yes, as you said, a drop in the ocean of what is required. Yes, in the time that they took to write up this press release and put it out and have a certain amount of commentary about it, they could have been working towards getting 10 times that amount fixed by cutting red tape and making it easier for building approvals. Yeah, it's an election year.
Yes, over the past decade or so, I can recall both federal and state governments making a series of announcements tightening restrictions or tightening rules against foreign buyers. And it's a pretty easy button to push if you're a politician because it makes it look like you're doing something, but really it has just a minuscule impact on the market because they make up such a small share of purchases. So I'm wondering, and this is me being a little bit cynical, do you think this is more of a political move rather than a bona fide policy move?
Yes, it's politics. It's a drop in the ocean, as you said earlier. It'll make such a minute difference. It's not even worth talking about.
Well, let's say for the sake of the argument that the government is right to stop overseas citizens buying existing homes. Now, the government as I mentioned earlier, this is just a 2-year ban, and the ban ends at the end of March 2027. The government says when that 2-year period ends, it will review the policy and decide whether to continue it. So, Owen, should the ban have been made permanent, or was it a good idea to make the ban temporary and then weigh up the evidence?
Yes, I'm not a fan of any permanent decisions like this anyway. It's because, like most government decisions, you make it a permanent ban, and then it's hard to reverse it. Whereas if it's just like because it might have been a bad policy decision um, in the first place, and it's hard to take it away. It's or you're in a position where you to be able to change it. It might have been a bad policy decision, and it's now where the situation has changed, and being able to reverse it makes it even more difficult. So, in short, it's politics. And most politicians don't think too far into the future, at least until and past the next election. Yes, the ramifications of these things um, is um, is very important to think of. So I don't think it's a bad thing putting a time frame on it. That way it can be reviewed or forgotten about. It's just like, oh yes, that thing's expired now. So yes, and it'll just sort of fly under the radar. So yeah, I think a lot of policies should have timeframes on them automatically so that they have to be reviewed.
So Claire O'Neill, the housing minister, was making the point that this would free up thousands of properties for Australians. So in other words, she's saying it will have quite a big impact on the sales market. But if foreign workers and foreign students are no longer allowed to buy existing homes while living in Australia, presumably they'll need to rent. So isn't this just going to push demand from the sales market to the rental market?
Yeah. Or they end up buying brand new properties and which you are in short supply already. And yeah, so it's not really fixing any problem.
Okay, well, I'm I'm glad we've resolved that one. Thanks, government. So should we be telling the government to help less?
um, or telling them that they're hopeless.
Okay. Well,
Yes.
I do know, of course, that Anthony Albanese listens to this podcast. I know you don't want to hurt his feelings, but I do also know that you do believe in saying it like it is.
Thanks, Nick. Very true.
And apologies, Albo. Let's move on to our final story. Wages growing more slowly, but still faster than prices. Wages grew 0.7% in the December quarter, which marked the slowest wages growth since March 2022, according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics. That reduced annual wages growth to 3.2%, which was the lowest since September 2022. The RBA has forecast that annual wages growth will experience little change between now and mid 2027, which is the extent of its forecast. Wages have now grown faster than inflation for 5 consecutive quarters. Previously, inflation grew faster than wages for 10 consecutive quarters. So, Owen, part of the reason consumer confidence has been so low over the past few years has been because prices have been rising faster than incomes, which has meant people have been going backwards financially in real terms. But now that incomes have risen faster than prices for 5 consecutive quarters, do you think that will flow through to higher consumer confidence?
Um, I think there's still the negative sentiment about cost of living out there, and I don't think the wages growth is necessarily across the board.
Hmm.
So there's still a lot of people hurting. But has there been a change out there in terms of people feeling like their prices aren't increasing as much? I think there has. So the um, the the mood out there has definitely improved. and people can see that they're starting to get paid more, and things aren't increasing in costs as much. So it just seems like the economy is starting to level out and come back to normal.
I wonder what impact that will have on the election. Heading into the US presidential election, the economy had been improving throughout 2024, but voters seem to believe that the Biden had done badly on the economy and Trump would do much better. Here we have a situation where, for much of Albanese's time in power, people have been very down on the economy. Maybe now it's getting better. I'm guessing that's probably the story Labor's going to tell during the election campaign. But if people don't believe that message and they believe, no, the economy is still bad and you've been a bad economic manager, maybe then they'll punish Albanese and give Dutton the keys to the lodge.
Yes, quite possibly. Yeah, there's a lot of negative sentiment towards the government, especially the way they came into this term. They're talking up themselves about getting on with the job and fixing all these issues, and and it was like a week after the election, um, the Prime Minister started talking about a referendum, and that seemed to dominate uh, his time and energy for the first year or so of his term, and so that people weren't happy about that, and and I think it made a huge stain, put a huge stain on his on the rest of his term. Yeah,
Well, I guess
and
we'll find out in 2 or 3 months what verdict people are going to deliver on this government. We've spoken many times about the need for the federal government to do less spending, but it's hard for the government to do less spending when both Labor and the coalition compete with each other to tell people how much they're struggling. Because how can you justify spending cuts if people are struggling? If people start to feel better off, Owen, I'm wondering, will that give the next government, whether Labor or coalition, more political room to cut spending and return the budget to a structural surplus?
I think so. A lot of people are realize that there is a lot of government waste and government expenditure, is which at the end of the day is their taxpayer dollars, and they'd rather have those tax dollars in their own pocket, or at least paying off debt, federal government debt, which we've accumulated a lot of in the last 15 years or so. So I think they would like to see a bit more of tightening the belt from a government expenditure point of view. As but in Australia, we like to look after the people who aren't in a position to look after themselves. So I don't think it will be at the cost of the most vulnerable.
Do we need a crazy right-wing billionaire to come in and slash spending in the government?
Um, I don't think we need to bring in a crazy right-wing billionaire to be able to do that. We just need a sensible person um, who's employed to be to look at the books and to cut government waste and make the government more efficient. And unfortunately, the word sensible doesn't often exist in politics and government.
Well, I was just about to give Jenny Reinhardt a call, but based on what you've said, I will tell her to stand down.
Yes, it's. I don't think Gina would get the job, and it's not saying that she couldn't do it,
Mm.
but yes, I don't think there would be enough political will out there for her to get the job.
Okay, well, it has been such a busy week of news. RBA, interest rates, politics, elections. I think the next few months are also going to be jam-packed with news. So I'm looking forward to future episodes. And thank you very much, Owen, for today's chat.
No worries. No worries. We'll chat again. I know for sure in about a week's time. See you then, Nick.